A support science on Cordelia marks my first foray into the world of awakening supports. I am aware, from the portion of the community that I'm most active in, negative feelings towards awakening are still pretty strong, even after 5 years of it being released. And while some people think I hate Awakening because I made fun of its silly story, that's actually not the case at all. I appreciate Awakening's existence in the series, and if you want proof, I made a podcast about it. But that said, I have absolutely no affinity towards any of the cast members of this game. Save for, like, Stahl. And Rickon, of course. Rest in peace, young buck. To start off this support science, let's explore Cordelia's origins. As a youngster, Cordelia was quite gifted. She was naturally smart and skillful. On top of this, of course, was her excellent work ethic. Naturally, such a combination of skills made her multi-talented and proficient in many different crafts. Unfortunately, such gifts were bundled with troubles. Her talent led people to treat her legitimate complaints and grievances with contempt. They assumed that she had nothing really to complain about. As a result, she felt isolated from others. Consequently, she had few friends growing up. Sumia was one of those. Sumia wanted to fight with the shepherds, but Cordelia had other plans. She dreamed to one day be a knight just like the legendary retainer of the first Exalt. And so, she idolized Phila, Emeren's guardian knight, and the most logical choice for a role model. She also dreamed of being closer to the person next in line to rule Elise, Chrom. In other words, she wanted to be the knight she always wanted to be, protecting the man she always wanted to be with. With these dreams, she joined the Pegasus Knights of Elise. But now, separated from her childhood friend, this prodigy was truly on her own. To make matters worse, her catty comrades didn't treat her like a friend, but instead punked her like the rookie she was. For Cordelia, she felt excluded, just like how she'd always felt. Then, after escaping as the sole survivor from a surprise attack, then tasked to warn Emeren of the oncoming Pelagian ambush, Phila orders her to stay with the shepherds and fight with them. Upon getting to know Cordelia, two things become clear. She's a perfectionist and is hopelessly in love with Chrom. That said, neither of her traits are mere gimmicks. Her perfectionism goes much further beyond the simple, I want to do everything perfectly attitude. Her perfectionism is self-destructive in nature, and her unrequited love is severely dispiriting. Combined with the trauma of losing her squad, she suffers from anxiety and grief. This video aims to explore how such anxiety and grief arise in different forms, what she does to confront them, and how she fails at treating them properly. Then it discusses how Cordelia actually matures as a character, through allowing her comrades to help her deal with her problems. Cordelia's dream is to be just like the legendary Pegasus Knight, to have the courage of a demon, but the heart of an angel, to be equally loved by her people and feared by her enemies. It is an extremely ambitious goal, so much so that she doesn't even want people to know in fear that she'd be laughed at for it. Still though, she's held on to this dream ever since she joined the Knights. And to be fair, her extraordinary lance technique and perfectionist work ethic makes her capable of actually realizing this dream. Usually idealism and having a goal is a good thing, but the way Cordelia perceives herself in comparison to her idols isn't idealistic at all. It's the opposite. She's very pessimistic. Consider her supports with Stahl, Donal, and Frederick. While they laud her proficiency in just about everything, she deflects praise whenever such remarks arise. When Stahl compliments her skill with the harp, she brings up Phila's skill with it and calls herself a clumsy amateur. She further dodges Stahl's bombardment of compliments and then hurriedly leaves the conversation. When Frederick remarks that he's envious that Phila has such a skilled protege in Cordelia, she's shaken in disbelief that Phila would think of her that way. And believing that Frederick has gone too far, she thinks that he's making stuff up just to hit on her. And with Donal, when he tries to compliment her in comparison to the knight, she rejects them and calls herself very ordinary instead. And when he keeps pressing the issue, she tells him to stop. Cordelia places her personal standards so much higher than Stahl or Donal or anyone else because her aspirations require a legendary amount of skill and determination. This is why she denies these compliments. She's essentially getting praised by amateurs. It doesn't mean much outside of niceties when she's constantly criticizing herself to the likes of Phila. This mentality helps explain why she comes off conceited in her B support with Frederick. For context, Frederick asks Cordelia if she can demonstrate her lance technique to new recruits. She supposes she can help him, but she doesn't see how demonstrating her legendary skill will be that beneficial for them, as she believes that they couldn't possibly comprehend her skills or even match up. Cordelia knows she's far better than mere recruits and assumes that the skill gap is too wide for them to learn anything helpful from the demonstration. I mention this because it seems like she flip-flops around from accepting praise and deflecting praise at the same time, but what she really does is deflect praise from people who think she legitimately compares to her idols. Cordelia's pursuit of excellence is dauntingly negative. She's never satisfied, criticizes herself, and only focuses on how much she isn't like that knight, or Phila, or by extension, Chrom. Not only is she caught up in this discouraging pursuit of excellence, but the man she loves is also far beyond her reach. Her intense feelings for Chrom give Cordelia grief, frustration, and jealousy. "You look so happy, Chrom. Did you just sweep another woman off her feet? The thing I like is just a bit further out of reach." These feel like passive-aggressive remarks reflecting her desire for him. Instead of just outright telling Chrom her feelings, she doesn't think she can do that. Her jealousy is also dialed up in Virion's S support as well, in basically the exact same way. "I see you sidling up to the maids and whispering sweet lies in their ears. Are so many damsels truly in distress that you must attend to them all?" Just like her pessimism directed towards herself regarding those of Phila's caliber, she also views her feelings for Chrom as hopeless. "Well, I used to be painfully lonely and in love with a man I could not have. I even dreamt of death." That line occurs on an event tile with either Severa or Morgan. Her pessimism, loneliness, maddeningly hopeless feelings for Chrom, and not to mention survivor's guilt created a recipe that was actually capable of driving Cordelia over the edge. This isn't some adolescent crush that Cordelia has for Chrom. Heartbreak is difficult to overcome, and usually requires distance and time to mend. But in a close camp setting, while serving the literal leader of the country, having that distance is straight up impossible. Especially if her lifelong dream was already to be at his side as his guardian. It's a complicated and messy situation, filled with caveats that she feels inclined to entirely internalize in fear of appearing weak to her comrades. She does her best to hide it from her peers, but Cordelia bears a lot of anxiety and grief. A handful of her supports explore how her internalization negatively affects her. Her Robin support reveals that she dwells on the deaths of her comrades and is unable to cope well with their sacrifice. In her support with Virion, she attempts to fix her self-ascribed judgmental behavior and single-mindedness stemming from her perfectionism, but ends up becoming more frustrated at herself when she can't fix it. In Gregor's C support, she's visibly distraught dwelling on her feelings about Chrom, and in Henry's B support, she admits that she willingly endures the emotional pain because she doesn't want it to go away. Her other supports reveal that despite her loneliness, she often spends her time worrying for others. She single-handedly oversees the condition of the camp, making sure operations are running smoothly at the cost of her own well-being. She exhausts herself to the point of having a fainting fit in Libra's support. She forgets to take care of herself in her S support with Gaius. Her thoughts about dinner preparations and laundry distract her from focusing on her swordsmanship with Lonku. Most of her alone time is either dedicated to physically exhausting herself for the sake of others, or mentally exhausting herself, criticizing herself, and dwelling on what she'll never have. On one hand, she's willfully destructive. On the other, whenever she tries to solve her own problems, she's self-destructive by accident. It's only until she bonds with her new comrades where her behavior starts to take a turn for the better. As I said before, Cordelia's survivor's guilt takes its form as she regrets only figuring out the real feelings of her deceased comrades after sacrificing themselves for Cordelia's future, and now being forever unable to reciprocate their true feelings back to them. This topic is only discussed with Robin. In their C support, Robin is impressed at Cordelia's ability to keep track of the army's inventory, and tells her that he understands why she's called a genius around camp. This upsets Cordelia, and she explains that her superiors called her that in a sarcastic and insulting way, as well as teasing and taunting her the moment she joined the Knights. Robin offers her solace, and she accepts, but instead of discussing her hardships, she asks them what they think of the javelin she just forged. As seen here, Cordelia is prone to pitying herself, but then quickly correcting her behavior. This indicates that despite her best efforts to keep her problems to herself, they usually make their way to the surface anyway. Her moments of self-pity also arise in her Henry and Virion supports, and in the latter, she reveals that she hides her feelings to prevent people from pitying her, because it makes her feel like she's lost, but we will explore more of that later. In their B support, Cordelia shows Robin her new and improved javelin based on his feedback. They're impressed, and they offer a hand in anything else Cordelia might need help with as a gesture of friendship. She's thankful for his offer, but then quickly changes her attitude. "No, wait. We can't be doing this. People will get the wrong idea. If you're so kind to me all the time, people will start to think we're friends. The peculiar fear she has understandably confuses Robin, since they assume that they already were friends, and they make sure that they are a friend of hers. Cordelia's fear is that Robin may not want to get close to her because she thinks that their position as Chrom's right hand makes them unapproachable, or at the very least a veteran soldier. Cordelia is entering the Shepherds as a transfer, and she may view Robin as an authority, similarly to Phila or her old squadmates. She's looking for Robin's best interest. She's fearful that rumors may spread between them, or perhaps that Robin may even be hazing her in secret. In their A support, Robin learns from Cordelia that the rest of the camp loved her javelin, and they remark that if her old squadmates could see her now, they'd be impressed as well. Cordelia chuckles and wonders if they are looking on from the afterlife. Robin discovers that the knights who were killed were part of Cordelia's platoon, but quickly understands the motive behind their sacrifice. Despite all the teasing, they loved you enough in the end to die for you? She reveals that she understood their intent as well, but this is also the source of her guilt. She regrets not having the chance to get to know her superiors personally. She's hurt that she only knew how much they loved her in their last moments. She chokes up a little bit, but stops her pity party and thanks Robin for getting those sentiments off her chest. Robin then figures out why the word genius upsets Cordelia so much. It's because her comrades actually meant it, and hearing the word was a reminder of Cordelia's regrets. In their S support, Cordelia decides to throw the javelin over a cliff as an act of letting go of the past and fulfilling her vow to become the knight they'd always hoped her to be. She promises she won't get upset at the word genius anymore, and promises not to cry in Robin's arms either. It's through Robin's companionship where she's able to overcome her guilt in a healthy and productive way. If her comrades sacrificed themselves for Cordelia to become the future, then she would need to find a way to let go and become the knight they always expected her to be. It's fitting then for the javelin, crafted by Cordelia's ingenuity, to be a metaphor for her resentment of being called a genius in the first place. I think it's important to note that it should be telling of how painful her guilt was if she couldn't help but weep in Robin's arms as well. I've already discussed how burdensome her perfectionism ends up being, but unlike her survivor's guilt, her neurotic perfectionism is not something that Cordelia can overcome. However, her judgmental attitude and single-mindedness, which manifest themselves from her perfectionism, are traits of hers that she struggles to fix. Such flaws are best explored in her support with Virion. In their C support, he lays them out in front of her. You are lovely, but firm and single-minded, which leads you to treat others harshly. You regret this flaw with all your being, and wish to reform your character. She often harshly criticizes others for their own habits or actions without considering their feelings. For example, with Sumiya, she deems her flower fortunes useless wastes of time and forces her to accept her ideology about the future instead. With Gaius, she criticizes his appearance and demands that he looks more presentable. At one point she chases him down, and in another, he even sarcastically calls her his mom. With Rickon, she orders him to rest after he gets exhausted from marching. While Cordelia's intentions are good in that she wants her partners to improve themselves, she doesn't encourage them, but rather she forces them to abide by her rules and standards. Sometimes it works out in the end, like with Gaius and Rickon, but other times, as seen with Sumiya, her methods end up not actually being what's best. In her C support with Sumiya, Cordelia assumes her logic is more rational and tries to make Sumiya believe she's wrong about destiny. You don't need some weed to tell you what to do, Sumiya. You control your own destiny. Trust me on this. Cordelia's orders actually make her more anxious because now she doesn't know whether or not she needs to work to keep her good fortune or work to change her bad one. And it's not until the end of their A support where she opens her mind about Sumiya's philosophy, whereupon she realizes that her take on fate, while more rational, is not what's best for her. This impulsive, overbearing behavior of hers directly stems from her perfectionism, or more specifically, other-oriented perfectionism, described as having unrealistic standards for significant others, placing importance on other people being perfect, and stringently evaluating their performance. It's also said to engender hostility towards others, loneliness towards oneself, and cynicism to both. Such a description perfectly matches Cordelia. She's openly critical towards others, and has a tendency to work alone or dwell on her own problems by herself. Now back to Virion. In their B support, Virion approaches Cordelia and remarks on her worrisome expression. Cordelia eventually admits that there is something going on, but insists to Virion to keep her worries to himself. because she doesn't want anyone else knowing she's troubled. And after asking why, Cordelia says that she hates being pitied and that it makes her feel like she's lost. Virion understands, and after some impulsive flirting, offers to talk to her about these troubles she has. If Cordelia feels like she's lost if she's been pitied by others, then what makes her feel like she's won? Reverence. Her aspirations are to be legitimately compared to the likes of Phila. She dreams of being at Chrom's side as his valorous and stalwart guardian. She feels like she can accomplish this if she overcomes all of her obstacles on her own, and instead of depending on others, others can depend on her for everything. She views seeking help or seeming in need of it a sign of weakness. This is of course untrue. It's naive and immature to think that she can achieve these goals simply on her own, and it's clearly not working if others in the camp are noticing that she's disgruntled. After their B and before their A, Cordelia and Virion chat about her grievances. In their A support, she says, "By talking to you, I was able to sort out my own feelings. If there are things about me that I don't like, I should just fix them." Their S support is one of my favorites that she has, and not just because their relationship ends up feeling much more natural than her other romantic pairings. Most of her pairings has her partner bringing up her secret love for Chrom. But for Virion, the writing handles this very smoothly in that it feels like Cordelia began to be affectionate for Virion as early as their B support. But lastly, and most importantly, is how realistically her judgmental behavior was handled. At the end of their S support, her behavior wasn't fixed. Because how could it be? Her hostility towards others is tied directly with her perfectionism. It would be impossible, or at the very least, very difficult to fix these innate issues without actual professional help. So instead, Cordelia learns that it isn't weak to depend on others for help. In doing so, she may have become more capable than before to reserve her harsh judgment towards others. Like Robin, Virion serves as a foil for Cordelia to become more emotionally mature. Last and certainly not least, Chrom. While this next problem may not be related to her perfectionism per se, it still represents an ideal of hers that is beyond her reach. Naturally, such a bleak outlook is not healthy, and like I said before, sometimes her feelings were so strong that she dreamt of death. But she wants to keep her feelings for him, no matter how painful they are. Cordelia fell for Chrom before the story began. Once in the past, I tried to do too much, and got myself into trouble as a result. At that time, it was Chrom who stepped in and rescued me from myself. If it hadn't been for him, I don't know what would have happened. This is really the only instance we know of Cordelia and Chrom's interactions in the past. Chrom is a courageous and mighty military leader whose heroics were witnessed firsthand by Cordelia. There has not been any other man in Cordelia's life that could vie for her feelings. However, once she's inducted into the Shepherds, this changes. With her new partners, she builds new relationships that give her a new perspective on affection, and the emotional distance away from Chrom that she never had before. Gregor in particular helps her realize this. Throughout their C to their A support, Gregor gives unintentionally bad advice to Cordelia because she's upset about Chrom not sharing any feelings towards her. He convinces her that acting spontaneous will catch his attention, but she ends up making him angry instead. Upset at herself from her failure, Gregor encourages her and calls her beautiful and charming. In their A support, she questions Gregor's strategy to seduce Chrom through Gregor's custom-tailored dress and makeup, but he just tells her that she'll succeed because she's passionate and beautiful, and later on, perfect. Cordelia's spirits are renewed and she leaves the conversation prepped to talk to Chrom again. Except in their S support, Cordelia never did confess her love to Chrom. She did it to Gregor instead. Gregor, stunned by this, asks her if the man she was after was him the whole time, and she replies, "Not at first." The more time she spent with him, the more she knew she'd been wrong. Gregor gets confused, so Cordelia asks him if he thinks she's charming, pretty, and if he likes her. He reconfirms his feelings from before, and they both agree to get married. Gregor showered Cordelia with compliments with the intent to give her the confidence to approach Chrom, not because he intended to woo her, like she suspected with Frederick. He always intended for Cordelia to be successful, and that's the key difference. His intentions were pure, and he wanted Cordelia to be happy. The more time I spent with you, the more I knew I'd been wrong. It's an open-ended statement, but what she means is that she learned that she should be with someone who puts the time and appreciation for who she is. By falling for Gregor, she realizes that her feelings for Chrom, no matter how strong, aren't unmovable. Chrom isn't the only man in the world, he's just the man she fell for first. Cordelia's best partners are those who help her overcome her personal pain. This is why some of her support partners, like Vake or Frederick, come off like she's settling. These supports don't compel Cordelia to undergo any personal growth throughout their support chain, but instead suddenly towards the end of their S support. She's not supposed to come off like she's settling, but the way that some of her supports progress creates the impression that she is. There's one thing about Chrom that I want to mention that I don't think would have fit anywhere else in the script. I get that people wished for Cordelia to marry Chrom, and that such a limitation was placed arbitrarily, but I don't think that would have been a good thing for her. To answer the question, why can't she marry Chrom when Olivia and a village maiden technically can? It has to do with how Cordelia views Chrom in the first place. She believes he's essentially a living legend. All of the dialogue she has with Chrom to begin with is emotionally charged. She's either expressing this passive-aggressive jealousy towards him, or is overwhelmed by his presence that she can't even contain herself and faints in front of him. Regardless of whether we as players want to have her support with Chrom, she doesn't think she's capable of doing so. Unlike Sumiya, who looks up to Chrom as well, they have an established rapport before the game even starts. And even though the Chrom and Olivia situation was admittedly hilariously mishandled, Chrom takes interest in her first, and they at least acknowledge the ridiculousness of Chrom's love for Olivia. It is definitely something that they should have treated in a more realistic way, and they could have. But her not being able to be with Chrom was necessary for her to emotionally mature. That emotional maturity gained without Chrom is best demonstrated when Cordelia is speaking with her children, Severa in particular. In their C support, Severa is very apprehensive and cold to Cordelia, and very reserved to the point where Cordelia insists that she tell her about her world. In their B support, Severa lists off reasons why she always felt in her mother's shadow, since she was perfect at everything, was loved, respected, pretty, smart, and strong. But Cordelia wants to know what her own daughter thought of her instead. Severa stops herself from saying that she was perfect, and instead tells her that she was cold-hearted, selfish, and had abandoned her only daughter. Cordelia, astonished at what Severa describes her future self as, begins to cry. But Severa immediately feels guilty and admits that Cordelia was indeed a perfect mother, and all the praise her future self was given were valid. In their A support, Severa admits that she was cold to her at the beginning because she was afraid of being hurt once more if her mother died and was lost to her a second time. And Cordelia promises that she will absolutely never part with her daughter again. Based on Cordelia's history with behavior she disapproves of, don't you find her reaction is different here? She isn't trying to correct Severa's bad attitude. Unlike her actions with Rickon or Gaius, she's not acting like a strict mother telling her daughter to act more respectful towards her. Instead, she allows Severa to be brutally honest with her, accepts Severa's opinion, as made up as they were, and even played along with her only giving out these important details of her world in exchange for dessert. In her paralogue, Severa accuses her that she left to fight for Chrom and never came back, making this exchange the first time Severa saw Cordelia since she was killed in her timeline. The exchange goes as follows. Cordelia says, "Look, there's no time for this. If you're a friend, speak now. If not, then stay out of Chrom's way or I'll have to cut you down." Severa replies, "Chrom, Chrom, Chrom. It's always Chrom with you." And after discovering that Severa is her daughter, she's accused of neglecting her, but Cordelia responds that she's beyond thrilled to meet her. Severa then asks, "Then why'd you leave me? You said you had to go off to fight for what really mattered, and you never came back. You picked Chrom over me." She responds, "You have me at a disadvantage, Severa. I can't answer for my future self, but when I said I was fighting for what mattered, I probably meant you. I'd want nothing more than to build a world where you can grow up happy and strong. At least, that's what I want right now." Severa is fixated on the belief that Cordelia abandoned her for Chrom, which may seem like Cordelia's learned nothing from being married and having a child, and instead took a complete 180 in the character development department. But I would argue the opposite. Let's focus on Severa first. Severa never indicated that Cordelia pined for Chrom, just that it was always about him. This is a pretty open-ended statement, especially coming from Severa. who was willing to lie and insult Cordelia just to gain distance from her. Maybe Cordelia was closely serving Chrom as the new exalt. Maybe Cordelia's husband died and her feelings for Chrom reawakened unintentionally. Or maybe Chrom, Cordelia, and the rest of the army fought to retrieve the fire emblem at the dragon's table. On top of that, Severa was much younger than what she is now. Combine that with an inferiority complex, a slew of emotional trauma, and social issues, and you have a rather biased testimony. Now Cordelia. Consider how rational and level-headed Cordelia is actually being here. She addresses Severa's accusation as calmly as possible. Instead of denouncing her accusations about her feelings for Chrom, she acknowledges that her future self is her own person and reasons with her actions. The future Cordelia probably did leave Severa to fight to secure a peaceful future, one that Severa could prosper in, but she failed. She died fighting for her daughter's sake. The fact that she doesn't hesitate or get anxious about the notion of still being affectionate to Chrom, and even treating her future actions as if it were history, is telling of where Cordelia's priorities lie. It's to love and protect Severa, not Chrom. Cordelia's actions with Severa indicate the final development of her growth. She began a lonely and lovelorn knight, dwelling on her bombardment of anxiety and grief-inducing emotions about many aspects of her life. It is only until she learns the value of companionship and forges brand new bonds with her new comrades where she gains the ability and capability to overcome these demons. Awfully emblematic for a game centralized around the theme of camaraderie, don't you think?